What's up, guys? Like Allison said, if you don't know me, my name's Gunnison, and I've gotten the pleasure to be in C3 for 3 years now. I am a coach over the Monday night houses and have just been super blessed to get the opportunity to speak of what God's been writing in my life. My story starts out at a very young age, meeting Christ when I was 6 years old. I gave my life to Jesus, and it would be not long after that I would get baptized with my brother Stockton. Which was just super special, and that from there I was just kind of expectant that, we give our life to Christ and everything's great, and that we kind of get to just run full steam of whatever the Lord's going to do in our lives, and that it's kind of just picture perfect. But little did I know at a young age that 2 years later that I'd be diagnosed with neuroblastoma, stage 4 cancer. And it was in this time that I would be on a journey for the next 5 years of going through the most intense treatment, to where I would have to relearn a ton of mobility. I would have to relearn how to eat. And it would kind of just wreck my whole entire life. And it was in these moments that I would have to lean on the Lord and not on my own understanding. And one moment that I'll just never forget through this journey is when I had kind of come to this point to where cancer had been so strong on my body, and that the treatments that they were giving me had just begun to take over. And that it would be about 2 days before my birthday, and an infection was spread, and doctors would ultimately declare my case helpless, and that my time had come to an end, and I would be in ICU for the next few days. And we would just be praying in a community, in a church would just get on their hands and knees but pray before the Lord. And it would be in this time that I would see one by one my siblings start to come in the room. And at this time, I was really thinking, I was like, why are my siblings coming in a room that's supposed to be sterile, that nobody's supposed to be coming in? And I was kind of just looking at them and like, why are they saying their like goodbyes? It's almost like this is different. That's not what it's usually like when I'm in the hospital. It's more of like, hey, it's good to see you. And this was almost a time of sorrow. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was because the doctors were declaring my case helpless, and that it was my time to go spend eternity with the Lord. And it was in this time that my dad would declare the news to my mom. And I will never forget that 2 years later, when my dad tells me this story, that I found so much faith and so much obedience from the simple words that my mom said. And my mom looked at my dad and said, God's not done writing his story. And it was in this moments that my mom was ultimately right, and that I serve such a good God, and that God has been so faithful and so good and so true to our family, and that I would have a 180 in my story. And that God would resurrect my body like he did Lazarus, and that ultimately it would be 3 years later that I'd be declared cancer-free. And, come on. Praise the Lord. And it would be on this that I would be like, man, okay, the doctors say that I can go live this normal life. And that in this life, I'm going back to school, and I'm starting to see all my friends, and I'm trying to find my purpose as this kid that had cancer once, and I'm still known as this kid that had cancer, and I don't know my identity anymore, but I know of this God that I show up for Wednesdays and Sundays, and I'm wondering, I was like, God, what's your purpose? Like, what's your plan? And I'm not seeing it. And so I started to struggle with severe depression and anxiety, to where that would ultimately cause a struggle and war in my brain. And that I would ultimately be like, Lord, why me? Why are all these struggles? Why are all these trials? Why are all these temptations, Lord? Like, why would you keep me here on this earth just to keep punishing me? And it was here in this moment that I had to open up my Bible and make my faith my own. And that I would flip to a man named Paul in 2 Corinthians. And in 2 Corinthians 11:23, it gives a glimpse of what Paul's life looks like. And Paul's life was a crazy life, to where he would endure for the gospel. And starting in verse 23, it says, I know I sound like a madman, but I have served him far more. I've worked harder, been put in jail more often, been whipped times without number, faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jews gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night, a day adrift at sea. I had traveled many weary miles. I had faced danger from flooded rivers and robbers. I had faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles, and I faced danger in the cities and the deserts and from the storms and the sea. I faced danger from men who claim to be Christians but are not. I have lived with weariness and pain and sleepless nights, and often I've been hungry and thirsty and I've gone without food. Often I have shivered with cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. And a few verses down, this is what struck me. It says, if I must boast, though, I'd rather boast about the things that show how weak I am. And it was there that I saw the purpose, that what Paul was trying to get at. And Paul was living this crazy, crazy life, and he lived a life after this. And through this, he was preaching the gospel to all of these churches. And it was here that I had found, he showed me that I had been missing this whole entire time, is that every trial has a purpose in his plan. We often want to understand the reason for our suffering, but God knows the end of our story. And if we trust him with it, it will be unimaginably good. And it was here that I would realize my purpose and my plan, and that was to run after what God was doing in these trials. And that was to look at it as, God, yes, I do deserve that. I do deserve these sins, and I do deserve all these trials that I'm going through. But yet, you're such a good God that you blessed me with eternity. And that, yes, I should have been on that cross. But yet, I get to stand where Barabbas stands. And that is free and set apart. And that now I get to go and declare to my high school, that I get to go declare to my college and to the nations of what Jesus is doing. And that he's saving and changing lives. And that he's there in the midst of all the trials. And it was here that I would get to go and I'd walk into college and I'd get to find my family in C3. And I'd get to meet wonderful people, and I would get surrounded by great community, and that I would get to meet people like CJ, like he said, and we got to run after the Lord with each other, and I would get to meet people like Razzie and Ty and Graham, and people who are just burning for the gospel. And it was in these moments that I realized, man, the Lord is doing something special here. He's doing something in Northwest Arkansas, and he's doing specifically something special at the University of Arkansas, and I can't miss that. I can't miss it again, and that I must start running after the University of Arkansas with the good news, and that I can't stop sitting on the sidelines anymore. In Philippians 1:21, it says, Paul knew that death was not a defeat to be the Christian. It is merely a graduation to glory and a net gain for Christian, because Paul knew that to live for Christ is one thing, but to die for him is to gain eternity. And that I would leave you with one thing, guys, is that we must live in the gospel, pass on the gospel, endure for the gospel like I talked about, and remember the hero of the gospel. And if we can do those 4 things, I believe that we will send not only Gen Z one over for Jesus Christ, but we will ultimately see the University of Arkansas one over for Jesus Christ, and that I think this room will start to look different. And I love what Eli's been preaching, is that we have to be people that are not only living in this world, that we have to be caught up in living of this world, and that don't get distracted of what the sin and what all of this culture is trying to tell us. And so C3, if I just give you and leave you with one thing, is that God uses trials and tribulations for the good and glory of his purpose, and that we are called to live in the gospel, pass on the gospel, endure for the gospel, and remember the hero of the gospel. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it.